Salam everyone. I'd like to just start off by saying thanks very much to Ali for that lovely introduction and also for inviting me here, and thank you very much to Judges for welcoming me here tonight as well. I'll just say a couple of words about myself. I'm 37 and married. I've got one little boy and another one on the way soon, inshallah. I went to high school here in the western suburbs. I went to Kings Park High. If anyone has heard of that place. It's not called Kings Park High anymore, right? It's got some other name, right? It's changed names to Copperfield or something. Anyway, so I went to Kings Park High. So I'm like you guys. I'm born and bred here. I went off to study commerce after I finished high school. I did commerce, and then I pursued a few different kinds of work. I eventually ended up in the tax office where I work now. But my real passion lies in, learning about Allah. Okay, that's what I find interesting. I've been a student of a collection of books known as the Risale-i-Nur, which is about Allah and belief in Him and His oneness and His names and attributes. So I've been a student of these books for a long time. What my project is, as Ali has kind of rightly pointed out, is that I'd like other people to know about these sort of issues too. I'd like them to hear the evidence for the existence and the oneness of Allah as well. But in order to be able to do that effectively, in a place where there's a lot of opposition to these ideas, I just felt that it was necessary to kind of go off and study what these guys study in their philosophy departments and in their science departments, and kind of have some knowledge of that to be able to engage with them on their own level about these issues. So that's the journey that I've embarked on. I've been studying at Melbourne Uni now for a year or so on that journey, and I've got another 9 or 10 years in front of me, so please make dua for me for my success. But anyway, that's enough about me. I just wanted to talk tonight about some of the, maybe just one of the main kind of arguments that we might use to prove the existence of Allah, right? But before I do that, I just want to say that you don't need these arguments actually to believe in Allah, right? We probably all find that we believe in Allah for reasons wholly apart from these kind of logical arguments that we'll talk about tonight. I believe that belief is something that's held in the heart, and the role that the mind plays is that the mind agrees with and corroborates it. Okay, so don't think that because you don't understand or haven't heard of these arguments that somehow your belief is lacking. I mean, you might have as firm beliefs as you can possibly have, even though you've never heard of these arguments. Okay, so don't be concerned about that. Where these arguments are useful, is where you will go out, and I can see that some of you guys are probably still in high school or maybe recently finished high school, and maybe you're going to go off out into the workforce soon, or going to go off to university. And given the place that we live in, right, we're here in Australia, we're going to, as Ali has alluded to, we're going to hear some opposition. We're going to hear some people present contrary views and some logical arguments based on, evidence from science, evolution, and you name it, right? Cosmology. They're going to provide some arguments to you to try to shake your belief, to try to convince you otherwise, or at the very least to explain why they don't believe. And if you've heard these arguments before, the sort of arguments that we're going to speak about tonight, if you've heard them and you understand them, then these kind of attempts at refutation, I'll call them, they won't affect you. So these arguments can be useful even for the person who already believes, already has firm belief. It is useful to know, in a broad sense, these kind of general arguments that we'll talk about tonight. Because our time is short, and I want to leave as much time as I can for questions from you guys, I'm just going to go through one argument, and I'll keep it as brief and simple as I can. If anything doesn't make sense, please just shout out and put your hand up, and I'll be happy to clarify. So the old theology scholars of Islam, right, dating back hundreds of years ago, they came up with some arguments that to this they are still the most highly regarded and most commonly relied upon arguments by not just Muslims, but even Christian and Jewish believers in God, okay? And that's something very special about Islam, that it's the Islamic scholars who have developed these arguments. There's one Christian scholar, for example, by the name of William Lane Craig. If anyone's heard of that person, but he, for example, has taken one of the arguments and he has even given it a honorific title. He's called it the Kalam, cosmological argument, and he's taken the word Kalam, of course, from the Islamic word Kalam, which can refer to Islamic theology in general, or can also refer to the Quran and Allah's speech. Okay, so Islam has played a very, very important role in the development of these arguments. So these scholars figured out years ago that out of all the things that exist anywhere, either in this universe or even outside of the universe, right, out of everything that exists, right, there might be one of two reasons why they exist. Okay, one of two reasons. Either because something else has created them. Okay, so take, for example, this phone here, right? Why does it exist? Because a group of people have come together and they've built it, right? They've designed and built it. So that's one way that things can exist. And in fact, I exist in that way. I exist. One of the reasons why I exist, you might argue, is that because my mother gave birth to me. Right? So now things that exist in this way, they're given the name contingent, right? Which kind of means dependent, right? They depend on something other than themselves for why they exist, to explain why they're here. Now, the other sort of way that something can exist is not because it depends on anything else whatsoever, right? It does not depend on anything. The reason why it exists is because of the way that it is, due to its own nature, okay? Now, it's very hard to think of things that exist in this way, because everything in the universe, we'll see shortly, that everything in the universe is not like that. Everything in the universe is created by something else, okay? We can't think of anything really in the physical universe that can be said to exist what we call necessarily, okay? So you've got things that exist contingently, created by something else, and you've got things that exist necessarily, which kind of means that they've always existed. They've existed forever, for all of time, or perhaps timelessly. Okay, so we'll talk about these concepts as we go. But, so something that exists necessarily, we could say that it's impossible that it shouldn't exist, and that's why it exists, right? Now, some thinkers say that something like a number, right? If numbers exist, I don't think they exist. Right? I think numbers are concepts in our mind, right? But let's say that numbers exist somehow. Now, numbers don't rely on anything, or they wouldn't rely if they did exist on anything else for their existence. They just exist because of how they are. They're a number. They don't need to get created by anything. They just exist. So that's kind of how students are taught to understand these concepts, right, at uni. The other sort of thing that will exist as a necessity of its own nature, now if Allah exists, if God exists, He, just by His very nature, just because He is God, I mean that's the definition of a God, is to be a sort of being who hasn't been created by anything else. He exists as a necessity of His own nature, okay? So that's the first thing we have to know to understand this argument that we're about to speak about. Okay, this is called the argument from contingency, or in everyday language, the argument from dependency. Okay, so now think of all the things in the universe. Okay, as I said, it doesn't seem that. Sorry, I'll grab a seat. It doesn't seem that anything really exists of a necessity of its own nature, right? Everything seems to rely on something else. Okay, can anybody think of anything that? Is there an exception? Am I wrong? Does anything exist in the universe just as a necessity of its own nature? Right? Can anybody think of anything?
Anything that hasn't been
Anything that hasn't been created by something else. It exists, but it hasn't been created by anything else. It just exists. No? So what's water made out of? So you've got you've got like molecules, right? So you've got hydrogen, 2 parts hydrogen to 1 part oxygen, should be, am I right? Yeah. Okay, or is it the other way around? 1 part hydrogen, 2 parts oxygen. Okay, right. So there you've got at least 2 components, right? You've got 2, it's the coming together of those 2 components that results in the existence of water. Hydrogen on its own is a gas, and oxygen on its own is a gas, and isn't water. But when they combine through some mystery, through some wondrous mystery, they form water. Think of yourself. You rely on your mum and dad to exist, for example, right? Of course, we might say that I don't rely on anything other than Allah to exist. That's the truth of the matter. But for someone who doesn't believe in Allah, let's say, even he must agree that he doesn't exist as a necessity of his own nature. He can't be said to be a necessary being. He can only be said to be a dependent being. He depends on almost everything in the universe for his existence, right? He depends on his mum and dad. His mum and dad depend on their mum and dad, and so on and so on. Okay. Now, think of every single thing in the universe. They're all like that. Okay. Now, there might be one exception, one area, one thing in relation to which the atheist might disagree with us. He might say, okay, all of the things that are made out of what they call quarks. Everyone knows what an atom is, right? Everyone knows what an atom is. Now, atoms are made out of protons and neutrons and electrons, okay? So now, what they've discovered in recent decades is that the protons and neutrons themselves are made out of groups of 3 fundamental particles called quarks, right? So they're the smallest, I guess, thing, in a way. I mean, photons also...
So it's like the new smallest thing.
Yeah, in a way, right? So it was always thought that atoms were the smallest thing, and now they've narrowed it down to these quarks. Okay, so when 3 quarks come together, they'll either be a proton or a neutron. And they're the building blocks of everything. So everything's made out of quarks. Okay?
How are quarks made?
Well, they're said to be, our current best science is the quarks are not made of anything else, right? As in they can't be broken down into other bits, okay? They're said to be fundamental. When something can't be broken down any further, it's said to be fundamental. Some guys think that even the quarks are made out of something. They think that the quarks are made out of things called strings, right? But this can't be proven at the moment. And they think that it might never be proven. But anyway, let's just stick with the quarks. The quarks aren't made out of anything else, okay? Come in. So the quarks aren't made out of anything else. So therefore, the atheist might say, all of the composite objects, all of the objects that are made out of other things, okay, they're dependent, but they're all just dependent on the quarks. But the quarks aren't made out of anything, so they're not dependent. Okay? The quarks exist necessarily, and it's thanks to them that everything exists. There's no God. Okay? So that's one counter-argument. Okay? But we'll come back to that. We'll revisit the question of the quarks later on. What I want to say next is that let's say that everything... No, actually, let's continue with these. Let's put to bed the issue of the quarks, okay? One way that I can be certain that something is contingent, right, dependent on something else for its existence, is if it hasn't always existed, right? So if something once didn't exist and then it came into existence, obviously it wasn't necessary. Obviously it didn't have to exist because it once didn't exist. Okay, that makes sense, right? So now, our best science, our best cosmology, right, the Big Bang Theory, right, everyone's heard of that. The Big Bang Theory, which is very well confirmed by a lot of evidence, shows that there was at the earliest stage of the universe's existence, there was a time when there were no quarks, right? There were no particles, no pieces of matter. What there was simply energy, right? There was heat and there was motion, and the quarks sort of came into existence a short time later. So therefore, the quarks don't exist as a necessity that of their own nature either. So we're left with nothing. Even space, right? Space is thought of as a kind of like a fabric. Think of a big bed sheet, right? Space is thought of like that, right? Space can actually move and can expand, right? That's the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory is that space is expanding. Even that once didn't exist, okay? The Big Bang Theory says that even space came into existence at the moment of the Big Bang. So we're left with nothing in the universe that we can say, that doesn't depend on anything for its existence. Everything in the physical universe depends on something for its existence. So here's the problem, right? I mean, can anyone see where I'm going with this? Like, what's the problem if nothing exists in the physical universe, if nothing exists necessarily, right? If everything depends on something else for its existence, what's the problem for the atheist there? Can anyone think?
Well, they need to identify that thing that everything's relying on, don't they?
Okay, yeah, so, I mean, that's where we're going with this, right? I mean, so we can't point at anything in the physical world and say that is not dependent on anything else, right? Everything is dependent on something else for its existence. Now, if you try to say that maybe, before the Big Bang, maybe it was something else, right? Maybe we don't know about it yet, we haven't discovered it yet. But prior to the Big Bang, there was some other kinds of particles or some other stuff. Now, again, if they are also contingent, if they also are dependent on something else, what ends up happening is that now we're off on what philosophers call an infinite regress. Right? We're off on an infinite regress, so that it ends up being that dependent things, contingent things, can never be relied upon to explain the existence of other contingent things, right? Let's say that I say that my existence is contingent upon my mum and dad, and that's the end of the story. Right? That's not the end of the story, because you'll just say, well, okay, are your mum and dad contingent? Do they depend on someone for their existence? And then you'll continue to ask about their mum and dad, and their mum and dad, and their mum and dad, and you'll go on forever and ever, right? Now, the atheist might say, well, there's nothing wrong with that, To explain the existence of this iPhone here, there's an infinity of material particles or material things that each explain the existence of the next thing, and it just goes on forever, right? But if you think about it, you realise that that's impossible, because here's how I understand it. I say to myself, if I have to wait for an infinite number of things to create each other before this iPhone will get created, will it ever get created?
No.
It's impossible, right? An infinite number of things first have to happen. Now, as we know, infinity doesn't end, okay? So therefore, the phone will never come into existence. And the same can be said of any contingent thing in the universe, right? That's a major problem. So what it means is that the only way we can account for all of these contingent things is by saying that there exists somewhere, or maybe nowhere, maybe it doesn't have a place. Maybe it's the sort of thing that doesn't have a place, okay? But we won't get bogged down on that, okay? But we have to say that there exists at least one thing that doesn't depend on anything else, okay? So one thing must exist necessarily. In the Arabic and Turkish terminology, we say that this thing is wajib al-wujud, which just means, that's our concept, and they've given it the name system of necessity of its own nature, right? So at least one thing must not depend on anything else to exist, right? If that one thing that does not depend on anything else, if that doesn't exist, then we have no explanation for why anything in the universe exists. Nothing whatsoever. Okay? So that's the argument in brief. And if you've understood some of that, you're doing well, because guys spent years and years studying this, a lifetime studying arguments like this and arguing against it, or in favour of it. So how are we going so far? Does that make sense to everyone, or is anyone have I just totally lost you guys? Or
yeah.
Oh,
So there's no actual there has to be some sort of source for all these things to rely on each other.
That's right.
So it all leads back to one big source, and that one big source is subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Well, that's what we'll argue, right?
Yeah.
We'll argue that, yeah, exactly, you know, if there are things that depend on other things for their existence, and there can't be an infinite series of things that, you know,
Because it
depend,
won't be there.
right? So therefore there has to exist something that is uncaused, right? Now, the next thing that the atheist will say is that, well, why does this thing have to be, why does this thing have to first of all be an immaterial thing? Because what do we say about Allah, right? We say that Allah is not made out of atoms. He's not like us, or he's not like our bodies, right? We say that Allah is an immaterial thing, right? A being not made out of, like, he's not the sort of being that can be touched like us. He can't be weighed like us, okay? So now the atheist will say, well, maybe the necessary being to which we can ascribe the existence of everything else, maybe that being is just some material thing. Maybe it's like, what was,
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Because this is a very common question. I want to put it back into a real life example for everyone.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've come across myself on the internet. It's probably not necessarily a strong argument, but if you haven't thought about it before, it can throw you off.
Yeah.
So that first 15-20 minutes we spent, we've proved that everything has to have a beginning, right? So you could have convinced Bob everything's has to have a cause for the creation, like a first cause. It has to be a first cause. It can't go back forever.
Mm-hmm.
We call it Allah. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But they're like saying, that's cheating. Because you don't know, you call it. Maybe it's just something else. Wait for science to tell us what that is.
Okay.
Why do you want to be a superstitious person and just call that thing Allah? Why don't you do more experiments and get smarter through science and find out what that thing is? Isn't it Allah just calling it Allah cheating? And that's what. Am I correct by?
That's exactly where we're going. Yeah. Right. That's exactly where we're going. So, because they'll say that, maybe our scientists haven't discovered yet what this necessary thing is, right? Because a lot of even atheists will agree that this argument makes sense, and that there has to exist something that doesn't depend on something else for its existence, right? A necessary being. Let's just call it that, a necessary being. They'll agree with that, but they'll say, it's some super dense pellet, right? Is that what you encountered the other day, Shabir? Someone said to you, like, Shabir just had an argument with an atheist about this very issue, right? And he said it could be like a super dense pellet, some other kind of particle, right? Some other kind of particle that we haven't discovered yet. So now here's where another argument comes in, right? What we'll want to know is whether or not this thing is moving or it's not moving. Because this is important. If it's not moving, then you can't do anything, right? So, like for anything to happen in the universe, there needs to be motion, right? All of the big things that exist, right? All of the composite objects like stars and planets and human beings, even like little atoms and molecules, right? All the things that are made out of quarks, they're only able to be constructed because quarks have moved and come and joined in certain ways, right? So I'll ask the person whether or not this super dense pellet that they put forward, I'll say, is that in motion or is it not in motion? Okay, and they'll say, no, well, it's in motion. Okay, first I'll say it's in motion. Okay, it has to be the sort of thing that can move and has been moving. Now, if it exists necessarily, that means that it has always existed, right? Remember, that was one of the key features of existing necessarily. It's always existed. It can't be the sort of thing that has come into existence at some point in time, because then, obviously, if it's come into existence, then unless it's popped into being out of nothing, then obviously it was created by something as well. So it has to have existed forever. Now, if it's moving, then that means it must have been moving forever. So you've got this super dense pellet that they're trying to replace Allah with, and it's been moving forever. Now, that's another problem. Can we say that something has been moving forever? Right? Can we say that? Can anyone see a problem with saying that something has moved forever?
Yeah, because if you trace back its steps, if you reversed it, then that would be like infinite pre-time, which obviously is that it?
you're on the right track, right? You're on the right track. So if something has been moving forever, let's say something.
It would never have gotten to the place it is where it is today. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think you're on the right track.
I'll let you say.
So something's been moving forever and ever, right? Let's say the planet Earth has been going around the sun forever. It has gone around the sun an infinite number of times already. Now, infinity is the biggest quantity that there is, right? You can't get bigger than infinity, right? Can you? Infinity
plus one.
It's the biggest, right? You know. So how is it that you can add to it? Right? So each new motion that happens, each time the sun goes around the Earth goes around the sun again. Now infinity is getting bigger, but it was meant to be infinite. How is it getting bigger? Okay. So this is the argument they call the impossibility of an actual infinite. Okay. And it's a very strong argument, and I don't believe it's been successfully defeated. So then the atheist is in trouble, right? He can't say that this thing has been moving forever. What he next has to say is that, no, it wasn't moving forever, right? It was stationary, it was not moving, and then it began to move, right? But again, that turns out to be impossible too, okay? So let's imagine a particle. Let's say this is the particle in question, all right? Now, it's not alive. They don't want to say it's alive because then it almost becomes like a god, right? They want to say it's just like a lifeless piece of lump of matter. Yeah, it's just a lifeless lump of matter. It hasn't got consciousness, hasn't got free will, it can't make choices. You know? It's just sitting there, and it's been sitting there forever. And when I say forever now, what I mean is not for all time, because you see, time is measured by the motions of things. Okay, on the main, there are different theories of time. Okay, but on the main theory of time, time is measured by the motions of things. So, in a world where there's no motion at all, that's a world with no time. That's a timeless world. Okay. Now we say Allah is a timeless being. Okay. He's immaterial. He's not a material being, and he doesn't move like we do. Right. So therefore, Allah is a timeless being. Now they'll say that this is a timeless being too, right? And it's just existed forever, but in the timeless sense, not for infinite time, but timelessly. Okay. So then, if this is a lifeless thing, and it's existed forever without moving, how is it that it's gone from its motionless state to then moving? Right? How has it gone from a motionless state to a moving state? It's got no free will. Forever it's been like that. Now it's not alive. Okay, how does it decide to now move?
Something needs to give it that push.
Yeah, something external to it would have to do it. But remember, they can't say that anything else exists external to it. This is the thing that explains everything else. Yeah, you're on the right track. I mean, but if I say that the necessary being that has created everything in the universe, if I say that that's Allah, now Allah can exist timelessly, but because Allah has got Allah is a conscious living being that can choose. In fact, he has what we call kulli irada. He has unlimited free will. He can choose to do whatever he wants to do, right? So that kind of a being can go from, having a situation where he exists and there is no universe and there are no particles in motion, to then, from that timeless state, creating a universe and setting it in motion, right? Because why? He's got free will, okay? Allah's got free will and he can do that. But a lifeless thing like this particle here, it can't decide to go from, it's been there forever, remember? Forever, timelessly, right? Timelessly has just been there for all eternity, motionless. How does it go to then moving so that then things can happen in the universe and it can create everything else? Okay. So in a nutshell, there's our argument, not only for at least the existence of one being that does not rely on anything else for its existence, but also an argument for why that being must be an immaterial being, right? And also a being that has the ability to choose, which means it must be alive. Okay? Okay? And this argument is called the Islamic principle of determination. So picture, an Australian or an American university, and they're studying these kind of issues. Well, they've named this argument the Islamic principle of determination. It's because, again, our Muslim scholars are the ones who have developed it and come up with it. And again, it's an argument that has stood the test of time. I mean, we're talking for hundreds and hundreds of years. No matter what science we've come up with, no matter what, none of these arguments have not been successfully defeated. And indeed, we look throughout the world and we see that the vast majority of people believe in God, whether they're Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. So that's the argument, and there are many others, right? That's just one, and that's not even necessarily the best argument. That's not necessarily the best argument. There are even better arguments, right? But on the basis of that argument alone, that for me is enough reason to confirm to myself that the belief that I already hold in my heart, that it is perfectly rational, right? No one can point the finger at me and say that you believe on the basis of faith alone. I believe on the basis of rational evidence. Okay? So now I'm going to open it up to you guys to try to, pick holes with my arguments, tell me where I've gone wrong, or even tell me about an argument that someone at school or anywhere else has told you to try to disprove that God exists, right? It doesn't have to be in relation to this argument. Anything else. Anything maybe that's caused you some doubt about the existence of God. Open it up to you guys. Have we got time, Joe? I'll finish on. You still got a bit of time, right?
Yeah. Take 45.
Take some time to think and see if you can remember anything that's been troubling you.
I have a question. You were saying that for the atheist argument to be true, then infinity must be possible, where you're saying infinity is impossible.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes, you're right. I'm saying that here in the physical world, right, I'm saying that a particle cannot have been moving, cannot have had an infinite number of motions. Right? We can't say that this has been moving for an infinite amount of time. You can't have, let's say that's its motion, right? Okay. It can't have turned an infinite number of times. Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Well, why not? Can you explain that again?
Okay, so now think of the concept of infinity, right? You know what infinity means? It kind of means that, infinite means kind of, finite means complete. Infinite means not completed, right? Infinite means just goes on forever. Okay. Now, if something has been has moved an infinite number of times, right? Then I can't get a bigger number than infinity. But right now, at this very moment, okay. So it's still moving. Look, how is it that I'm adding to infinity? Infinity is already the biggest number, right? It's already the biggest quantity. So I shouldn't be able to add to it. Okay, I shouldn't be able to add to it.
But the way I think of infinity is it's endless.
It's endless.
Yeah, so
the present moment, therefore, marks the end of infinity then. If this has been moving for an infinite amount of time, right now, this present moment, right, if I could stop time right now, well, there's the end of infinity. And that's impossible. We should never be able to get to the end of infinity.
So, Turhan, the way I think about this is just imagine like a scenario from the real world, okay? There's a man on death row. He's taken out into the yard, he's going to be shot. And they tie him to the pole, they blindfold him, and you have the firing squad ready to kill this man. And before the sergeant can give the command to say fire, he says, somebody comes running and says, wait, you got to call higher command to figure it out. You got to call higher command to get the orders to shoot that man. The sergeant says, okay, so, you got a few more minutes. He calls his sergeant and he says, can I shoot this man? And then his sergeant says, okay, just wait a minute, I got to call my sergeant. And he calls his sergeant and says, can you shoot this man? And he says, no, I got to call my sergeant. And it keeps on going forever. The question that arises, will that man ever get shot if he has to keep calling his sergeant and his sergeant? Because that's what we mean by infinity. Yeah. He's got to keep calling higher command, and his higher command never stops because it's infinite. So will that man ever get shot? So similarly, if we had to ask, like for instance, what caused the universe, if somebody said, oh, some other universe, or even like what caused that particle, some other thing, we'd have to ask, then what caused that and what caused that, and that example demonstrates that you can't keep asking what causes that thing infinite amount of times, because that thing will never.
So that's the infinite regress.
Everything relies on another source.
Yeah.
So another way that they've kind of, like our scholars have pointed out the absurdity of saying that something is actually infinite, right, in the physical world. You know that, for example, the Earth goes around the Sun more quickly than, say, Jupiter, right? Does that make sense? Because Jupiter's further out. So, you know, the Earth will go around the Sun every, 365 days, and Jupiter will go around the Sun in Earth days, I don't know, some greater number than that, right? Now, if both have been going around the Sun for an infinite number of time, then Earth will have completed an infinite number of orbits, and Jupiter would have completed, what? An infinite number of orbits. But Earth should have completed, I don't know, maybe twice as many orbits as Jupiter. So now you've got two things, two quantities, both of them infinite, but one's twice the size of the other. Okay? So again, it's absurd. It's absurd to try to say that...
to relate something physical to infinity.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And there are many, many other ways. I mean, there's this thing called Hilbert's Hotel. Let's say that I own a hotel. Okay, I own a hotel, and this hotel's got an infinite number of rooms, an infinity of rooms. Now, what happens is someone comes in, right? Now, all my rooms are full. Okay, all of the rooms are full. So there's an infinite number of guests in an infinite number of rooms, and then Ali comes and says, "Can I have a room, please?" And I say, "Yeah, no worries." All my rooms are full, but nonetheless, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to move each person into the room one above his. So I'm going to get the person from room 1 and move him into room 2. I'm going to get the person in room 2 and move him into room 3. And I'm going to keep on doing this. And that way I'm going to create room in room 1 for the new guest. But the problem is that at the start, all of my rooms were already full, right? But it owes to the nature of infinity that trick that I played, that I can do that. If I've really got an infinite number of rooms, then I can move the person in room 1 into room 2 and so on to infinity and create room. Okay. And then what if all of the people, let's say that all of the people in the hotel now go home, right? Except for the people in rooms 1, 2 and 3. How many people have left the hotel? Who's mathematically minded? Right? I've got a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and all of them leave except for the people in rooms 1, 2 and 3. That's right, someone said it. An infinite number of people have left, right? An infinite number of people have left, so yet I've still got 3 people left in the hotel. You know what I mean? I've still got 3 people left. So I started with infinity, right? Then I subtracted infinity, and then I've still got 3 left over. So that's why in mathematics they say you're not allowed to do minus with infinity. You're not allowed. But if you say that infinity exists in the real world, you can't tell the hotel man that no, you're not allowed to do that, because in mathematics you're not allowed to do minus. You can't stop people from checking out of hotels in the real world. Okay, so all of this proves that infinity is just a concept in your mind. It cannot exist in the real physical world. Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
Anyone else have any? Doesn't have to relate to these arguments. Any other? I don't know. Has anyone tried to, maybe on the internet or somewhere, tried to come up with a reason why you shouldn't believe that God exists?
This is just a different argument.
That's right. Yeah.
A lot of scientists, a lot of theist scientists believe that the Big Bang itself is the God, as it started from a very dense particle and exploded, created the universe and the time and the space, and is continuously, infinitely expanding.
Okay.
What do you think about that argument?
Well, actually, the discussion that we've had tonight actually would refute that argument, right? Because so you've got a super dense pellet, right, or whatever, you've got some super dense particle. Now, I say to you, has this particle always existed, or was it created? You have to say it's always existed, right? Okay, has it been moving forever, or has it been stationary forever?
The Big Bang Theory suggests that it was stationary.
And then it exploded, right? Okay, so if it's a lifeless entity, hasn't got life, if it has existed forever and it hasn't been moving forever, how did it go from being motionless to then exploding and moving? Okay. How can a lifeless thing do that?
A higher power calls that
well, if Allah exists, if some other beings that has got free will, then yeah, he could. If such a thing existed, then he could have done that. But actually, that version of the Big Bang Theory is like it's a radical view, right? The accepted version of the Big Bang is that before the Big Bang there was nothing physical. There was no space. There were no particles, right? There was nothing physical. And if that's the case, how is it that the universe has come to exist then? Right? If first there was nothing physical, now there's something physical, okay? So you can see that this is actually the contingency argument. So the universe as a whole is contingent, right? As a whole. Once it didn't exist, then now it does exist. So now, can something come from nothing? You know, that's the problem they've got. If the universe has come to exist when first there was no universe, then it must have been created. And if the universe is all of matter, like if everything physical comes within the definition of the word universe, then whatever's created has to be non-physical, has to not be itself a material thing.
Oh, you know how you say before the atom smashing, not before the atom smashing and the Big Bang and all that, how there was nothing.
Yep.
I heard that that force smashing and everything coming to alive, that was Allah saying all. That's what I heard.
Okay, yeah, I can't confirm or deny that. I mean, look, in relation to those kinds of things, you know, we can only look to like if someone says Allah did something, right? Well, the only way that I can know whether or not that's true is by looking to the Quran or looking to the Hadith, right? Those are the authentic sources, or looking to the writings of the rightly guided scholars who have understood the Quran in a certain way. If they say that Allah has done something, that gives me a reason to accept it. But if it's not based on the Quran or the Sunnah or the Hadith, I haven't got a reason to. I've got no reason to accept it.
Yeah.
Please.
I think another way to put it, or argue against that argument, is actually by talking about that everything does have a purpose. Human beings, the world, or just an object, a table, it does pursue a purpose, and at one stage it does end up dying or fading away, just like human beings. So,
yeah.
For an atheist to come up to you and say that, can you prove that some Allah does exist, or it just came to happen by the Big Bang Theory? But I'd say that like everything does have a purpose, and that's the reason it was created. So it pursues a purpose, and eventually, and like these people, I think everyone does believe global warming is coming to a stage. So like that could be an argument you progress as well, which like eventually, maybe in about 100 or 200 years later, it's going to be even worse. And I watched not a movie but a trailer of a movie. It's a documentary just in class a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
It was talking about global warming, and this guy, I forgot his name, but he was saying that it's proven that in about 100 years or 80 years from now that part of America is going to be underwater if global warming is going the way it is. So eventually even the world is going to come to an end, and I think that everyone does believe this, believers or non-believers. So
I think you're right.
like putting out purpose out there would
Yeah.
be an argument.
Yeah, you know what?
Argument.
Yeah, the brother's right. I mean, and you know, purpose in the philosophical discourse, they use a different word, but it means purpose, right? Like they say teleology, right? The teleological argument is, I think, what you're alluding to, right?
Yeah.
It's from the Greek word telos, which means something has a purpose, right? And yeah, you're right. You know, we kind of see that things in the universe sort of seem to be working together toward a purpose, right? Why do three quarks, right, in different parts of the universe, three quarks come together, and it's only because they've come together that we can have like a proton. And then another three quarks somewhere else come together and you have a neutron, and then you can have an atom. And that's why you can have tables and chairs and human beings, right? You know, we can see purpose there, and we can validly ask, how is it that that's the case? So here you've got all these lifeless, unconscious, dumb particles, right? How is it that they can work together in this way, right? How is it that, for example, like, who knows, like, who's done science or physics recently, and who knows what the speed of light is, roughly? Does anyone know?
3 times 10 to the 7.
Okay, so some like 300,000 k's a second or something, right? Some massive number. So light consists in what these massless particles called photons, right? Am I right? I mean, I haven't done science for a long time, so if I'm wrong, so please tell me. So you've got these photons, they're massless particles, and they move at a certain speed. Now, why is it that the photons right here, right now, that are enabling me to see you guys, why is it that they go at the same speed as the photons so far away on the other side of the universe that we can't even access them, that they will never ever reach us, right? How is it that every photon in every part of the universe acts in the same way? How is it? Do they know each other? Are they conscious? You know, I mean, how is it? Okay, so these are all major problems for atheism, major problems.
Yeah. And another thing is that not everything can be proven, even with the big scientists. And eventually, like, I think that God, I read it somewhere else as well, that God has blinded us, every human being, maybe atheists or Christians or Jewish people more than us, because obviously we should be happy that we were born into a Muslim family, but we might be able to see things other than that, but eventually humans can't see things that are external, even if they're scientists, but there's things that can't be proven eventually. But,
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot in, there are a lot of things in science, for example, that are accepted, but which can't be proven. Actually, even in logic and philosophy, right? For example, we cannot prove that the external world exists, right? So I think that I'm here in a room and I'm sitting on a table and you know all these cool guys in front of me, right? That's what I think, but I can't prove that that's true. Why can't I prove it? Well, who's seen The Matrix? Come on, everyone's seen The Matrix, right? Now, I cannot disprove that I am a character in The Matrix, right? Philosophers argue about this like constantly, and to this day, no one has been able to defeat the argument that says that we can't prove that I'm not a human being. I'm a brain in a vat of chemicals, and I'm being fed these, you know, electrical impulses that is making me perceive the world the way it is, right? I can't disprove this. It is impossible to disprove it. But, of course, we believe that we really are here. You'd be crazy to think that you're not here, you know? So you're right, there's a lot that we can't prove, but nonetheless, it seems rational to believe certain things, you know? So that even if, you know, because, of course, what some scientists and atheists will say is that I can't see God. I've got no way of detecting His existence, right? I can't touch Him the way I can touch these tables. Right?
That's what I meant by blind or something. Obviously, if we were able to see God, like He would defeat the purpose.
Yeah, yeah. You know, but of course, even though we can't detect him in that way, we've got arguments, we've got evidence to say why he must be there, and tonight's discussion was just one of those. So,
2 minutes left, yeah?
yeah, so I think we've come to the end of our time, guys.
Alright, just to wrap that up. So that was awesome. That was really mental gymnastics for me. But we need to remember, you know, some of us are wearing scarves, some of us pray 5 times a day. I'm sure it's all of us. We fast. But who are we doing it to? We're literally putting our heads on the floor. And if we don't know who it is, it just really makes the action a little bit sometimes funny, especially to the outside world. Alright, you're putting your head down on the floor, but who is it to? Tell me a bit about this being that you are literally praying towards. And you know what we did today was we really invested time and energy and really thought hard about who this being is. And then we arrived at some necessary characteristics of Allah, because Allah has names and attributes. He introduces himself to us through the din, yes? Yeah. So 99 beautiful names and many other names. And guess what? You know, I found it very interesting as Turhan has walked us through all the requirements of Allah. They actually all lined up with the names and attributes that I've been taught. Like the necessarily existent being, the one that had no cause, but He is the cause of everything. The one that isn't dependent. And you know Allah's all His names, and I don't know them all in Arabic, but so I found that very fascinating. So thank you. So for me tonight, my iman went up that next notch. Another interesting thing is, I just speak for myself, but I remember growing up, just finishing uni, and I was handed a lot of books from atheists and then with a whole bunch of other explanations for the reason we're here. And believe me, they had me swinging, you know, at that young age, because my knowledge was weak. So my iman was going lower. And Hojam, is it possible for the iman to go up and down? So there's a danger. You've got to do these sorts of things every now and then to bring that iman up, and then that will, inshallah, be a reward for you because your prayers and everything else will be more sincere, because now you know who you're dealing with when you put your head down. Thanks for listening, and thanks for coming over.